Watch any Maple Leafs game or Blue Jays game or football of any kind, and the one thing you will see for sure, ads inviting you to bet. And it's not just to bet on the outcome of whatever contest you're interested in. It's really nitty-gritty stuff, sometimes having nothing to do with the game. People bet millions on the color of the Gatorade that would be dumped on the coach of the winning Super Bowl team. It was purple, incidentally. It's sometimes funny, often annoying, but it's also very big business and potentially big trouble. With us now for more, in the nation's capital, Brian Massey, the NDP member for Windsor West. In Windsor, Ontario, Chelsea Rodriguez, problem gambling counselor at Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare. And here in our studio, Paul Burns, President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, and Deirdre Querney, registered social worker with the City of Hamilton's Alcohol, Drug and Gambling Services and co-creator of Brain Connections. That's a project to share information about gambling and the brain, and we are delighted to have you two here in our studio. Brian and Chelsea, thanks for joining us tonight here on TVO. I just want to start by putting some facts on the record here. According to Ipsos and their polling organization, 47% of adults in Ontario say they have done some form of online gambling in the past year, almost half. 35% have played online casino games. 30% of Ontarians have tried sports betting. That compares to 22% of all Canadians, so we're a little bit above the national average. Okay, the feds lifted the ban on single-game sports betting in the summer of 2021. Ontario began regulating in April of 2022, so we're almost a year later, and I guess I want to find out just off the top here, how do you think it's going? Paul, how do you think it's going?
Well, I think it's for customers, obviously there's a lot of choice right now. But the two things that coincided was the change in the federal law to permit single event sports betting, a product that Canadians were seeking through offshore online sites to the tune of billions of dollars for years. And then the province of Ontario deciding to create a regulated marketplace for all online gaming. And those two things came together with the launch of the Ontario regulated marketplace in April. Sports betting started to be offered in the fall of 21. So what we see now for customers in Ontario in particular is a lot of choice. But a regulated marketplace that comes with understanding there's fairness for customer. People were gambling in sites that weren't regulated, didn't know where they were.
So now it's regulated?
Now it's regulated. It's within the standards set by the province of Ontario. The province wanted to make to what was called the gray market for many years because the law in Canada is a bit unsettled in terms of whether the activities of offshore gaming sites that were accessing Canadians was truly illegal or not. And so Ontario decided to take action.
Well, the idea being the money stays here.
Money stays here. Consumer protection was really at the forefront of what they were doing in terms of some of the standards they've set for KYC for signing up and verifying customer.
Know your client.
Know your customer. Right. Verifying who they are, where they are, that they're in the province, that they have proper ID, and adhering to anti-money laundering, to the responsible gaming standards. All of those things are now put in place. So, but for customers, a lot more choice.
Chelsea, what's your take on it?
Well, of course, this has been legalized, and we're seeing clients with issues with online gaming much before it was legalized. So for us, especially with the pandemic, there was a shift once the casinos closed. Many of our clients did turn to online gaming.
Brian Massey, what say you?
Well, it's a good start with regards to getting the black market and competing against the nefarious operations that have no regulation. I'm a little concerned about the intensification of advertising that took place. And that was somewhat expected to a certain degree because you have a lot of market forces that are going for customer base right now. So you've seen a really aggressive, in my opinion, advertising campaigns because once you get somebody in your customer base, it's easier to keep one than to win one over. So those are the challenges that I think that we see in the forefront right now. But it's definitely better than it going to organized crime and making sure that we're actually going to have some issues that we can have control over.
Okay. Deirdre, your view.
Well, I agree with Chelsea and Brian. Basically, what I've seen, and this is just anecdotally because we don't have the research yet, but there has been a shift from the brick and mortar casino being the main problem, usually slot machines, to what we have now, which is just about every caller we have at Alcohol, Drug and Gambling Services who has a gambling problem is saying online gambling is the issue. That's a huge change in the landscape for us. And the other thing is people are talking a lot about how triggering that advertising is that Brian was talking about.
Triggering meaning what?
Meaning you can't watch a game without seeing gambling. When you have a gambling addiction, and this you'll see on brainconnections.ca, when you have a gambling addiction, your sensitivity to the gambling cues is much heightened. So I might not notice it, you might not notice it, but someone who has an addiction will be honed in on those ads. And so, or on social media or wherever they're going, radio commercials, the intensification of the advertising is having an effect on people who have an addiction. So it's really, really hard for them to just sit back and watch a game with their families and not have that in their face.
Paul, what's the industry doing about that?
Well, the industry in many cases, it's actually a shared partnership when it comes to sports broadcasting and gambling advertising and sports broadcast. The leagues have policies about how they want to see their broadcasts portrayed, limiting ads. In some cases, the NFL has very specific policies about how many ads. The broadcasters here in Canada have undertaken to limit share of voice. And actually, the statistics show that you're not seeing any more gambling ads in sports broadcasts than you were seeing for automotive company or financial services. In fact, the statistics show that there's actually less gambling advertising than those. But it's new. And that's part of what we haven't seen a lot of gambling. The only gambling advertiser in the province of Ontario was the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. They still are, but so there's a newness to this as well. The companies, clearly because of the regulatory standards that come behind the rules here, are required to provide tools and education to players, so how they can control their spend, their time, but also actively monitoring player behavior so that they can actually see players that are exhibiting signs where they've been a consistent $25 a week sports bettor, and all of a sudden the amount of money goes up or the number of bets go up, that they will actually activate and talk to that customer.
Okay, one thing though, there's no organization called Truck Buyers Anonymous because people have a compulsion to buy trucks. There is Gamblers Anonymous because people have a compulsion to gamble. So is the analogy about the number of commercials in a football game really relevant?
No, I mean, it's the newness to it. So advertising is part of promoting a regulated marketplace because we knew there was close to $1 billion in profits leaving the province every year to offshore sites that were advertising on social media platforms. Some were advertising play-for-free sites on television. So now we've now been able to, I think there's limiting the choices for Ontarians, believe it or not, through this, but also at the same time, operators are proactively promoting the tools for players to manage. Advertising has become part of that regulated marketplace. And
let me get Brian on that. Do you think there is adequate attention by the Gaming Association, by the industry itself, to ensure that there are not a plethora of ads on the air and that they do remind you to gamble responsibly?
Yeah, well, the Gaming Association has been clear on this before, but I think it's up to us as the regulator under the Canadian Broadcasting Act, and as well, it was one of the weaknesses of the legislation was that we just basically devolved it to the province, and we knew that from the get-go. It's still a better situation that we've had in the past. So the Ontario Lottery Gaming Commission, they do have all those checks and balances that Paul mentions. When you sign in, you actually have to be in the country or the province as well too. But what I'm concerned about is during the game itself, the heightened experience of trying to affect a person's behavior just to watch that event. And I think that's a little bit different than, another commercial. This is an ongoing experience. And what I'm worried about right now is that we should be walking, not running towards this experience. And so I'd like to see, and some leagues have been great in terms of less of a reaction. The NHL, for example, is very aggressive on this. They're even using current athletes, which I think are compromised individuals, to promote events. Whereas others have kind of, stayed back and played it a little bit more related to the, I guess their traditions of not being as influencers during the game. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Chelsea, can I get you to comment on the advertising? Because I know that probably most of us have seen those ads with Wayne Gretzky and Connor McDavid, which are, frankly, they're good ads. They're quite funny. They certainly let you know what the product is. But I guess there's a question of whether or not the saturation amount is too much and what you think of them.
Well, I think that by including celebrities, it creates this normalization of the gambling behavior, as this is part and parcel to the sports watching experience now, for example. And we know that when activities such as gambling are more accessible and the exposure goes up and therefore they're more normalized, you may see an increase of problematic gambling behaviors. So I can speak for our organization that many of our clients will use the terms, it's inescapable, right? I can't look anywhere, I can't go anywhere without being triggered. And when I say being triggered, that means triggering this strong urge to gamble. So it's very tough out there for some of our clients to maintain their sobriety in this particular climate.
I understand that, but then let me do this follow-up. What percentage of people would you be talking about who are watching a game who might be triggered by seeing an ad?
I wouldn't have that data necessarily. I don't think anybody has that data per se because this is so new. I can just speak to the majority of our sports gamblers that we see here at Problem Gambling at Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare, that we speak about high-risk situations when we're trying to work out a recovery plan. And we say, try to avoid these external triggers as best you can. And with this increase in ads, it is becoming a little more difficult to do that naturally because it is almost everywhere that they look at this point.
Well, let me take that up with Deirdre then. If you've got, let's say, 5 or 10% of the people watching any particular game who have a problem being triggered, are we really saying that we should be canceling all advertising if 90% are doing it, 95% are doing it just fine?
Well, actually, it's interesting that we're talking about this because in the United States, the ICRG, the International Council on Responsible Gambling, has put out a call for a Center for Excellence on studying advertising and gambling to find out for sure what is the impact, right? We don't know, right? We don't.
You don't have numbers either.
We do not. And so all we have, Chelsea and myself, is this anecdotal evidence that it's different, that it's changed, that it feels oppressive, that it feels like you can't just do your normal activities without this inundation of ads. And so, my hope is that Ontario will also follow suit and do these kinds of studies. It's really important to know what exactly is happening with people before we make decisions about what to do.
Paul.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. Flutter International, which is a company, the parent company of FanDuel and PokerStars, is actually with the Responsible Gaming Council here in Canada, is funding a study to look at advertising because we do want to learn. There is a news. That's really what the new part is. The gambling activities have been accessible to Ontarians before and after all of this. Because the internet was there and available to anybody who wanted to use it, without many of the controls that are now in place.
Do you have a sense about what percentage of people have a problem with gambling who are watching these games?
Not watching the games, but we know in the population that the rates of severe problem gambling can, depending on jurisdiction, range from 0.5% to 1.5%. And then there's others that have control problems that may be episodic in many ways. And there is an understanding of that player, but what is advertising? And because we have had, as we said, we've had gaming advertising. Do we have more? Yes. But it's, in terms of, because it's different. And the activity is now creating these companies legal and regulated. With that comes the ability to provide advertising. I think what everybody is learning from this, broadcasters, as they look at what the content is in their broadcasts, are evaluating those things as well. And that's why I talk about a shared responsibility, because the NHL and Major League Baseball, in their collective agreements, allow their players to be brand ambassadors. In fact, the NHL's decision predated North American online gaming, was actually their European-based players who would do it in their home countries.
Okay, let me get this from Brian then. Do you think there needs to be a crackdown, Brian, in the use of professional athletes, either retired or current, in the advertising of gambling options during games?
I think the current ones that are playing, or if you're coaching or you're involved and it's like a conflict of interest where you have, I guess, some type of connection to the outcome, would be a responsible way to do things to start with. I'm less concerned about the previous ones that are disassociated from that lifestyle now, but the ones that are currently doing that, it's very difficult to watch. I'm a hockey coach myself, or I used to be until recently. And I don't want a celebrity to come on and watching your game with your family and celebrity says to bet on me. I mean, it just doesn't wash with me. I think that we could just slow it down and do the responsible thing here. And I'm confident that if we can do the proper research and we work on this together, that we could actually build a better system. What we had before was just outrageous. I mean, we were literally letting organized crime and the gray and nefarious businesses run our lives with this. And so now we have control over some of the information, which should be the process. And right now, I'd like to see them put the brakes on the current athletes because it just seems doesn't pass the smell test to me.
Well, there is, Chelsea, there is precedent for this. Apparently, the United Kingdom legalized sports betting and then made a decision to ban celebrities that appeal directly to children, as well as sports stars. They can't appear in gambling advertisements. Do you think we need to do that in Canada?
You know, I'm not the one to make the judgment call on that, Steve. However, I will say that it would be nice to see that if there's going to be this increase in advertisement, that there's also an increase in the acknowledgement that there are services like ours that are free services that cater to people who are on the gambling spectrum and even loved ones. Because oftentimes loved ones spot an issue before the person gambling themselves do. So I think that it would be, I'm always going to advocate for more supports and more awareness because there are still people who come to the center and we cater to the entire province that say we had no idea help existed. We didn't know that there was a possibility to gain this support and these tools. So, of course, I'm not one to say on how people should or shouldn't advertise or endorse. I will just say that I can only speak from my experience with my clients that we would love to see a little bit more of some safeguards in place for this.
Deirdre, would this be a reasonable safeguard in your view, banning athletes from appearing in these ads?
Well, I'll answer it this way. I think this question speaks to, again, the need for research to guide what we're doing. So if England made that decision, it would be interesting to see what prompted that. What did they know? And what can we do similar research? I will say again, anecdotally, I was at a little webinar with featuring different ethnocultural problem gambling counselors working with different marginalized populations. And one of the counselors was saying in the population that he works with, stars, actors, are treated like gods, right? And sometimes they make temples for them. And one of them had become one of these advertisers for gambling, and he noticed a huge increase in the number of people who were gambling because this actor was doing it. So so you know what you were saying before is there is no Truckers Anonymous. This kind of advertising is different than other kinds of products, right? And I think we have to be really careful what we're doing and let the research tell us what the next steps ought to be.
Brian, do you have a view on whether or not pro athletes ought to be disallowed from participating in these ads?
Yeah, I don't think that they should. And right now, again, I would call for the leagues that really lobbied for this. And ironically, it was the NHL that actually resisted this for the longest period of time, and Bettman as well. They weren't terribly good to work with, to be quite frank. And now they're the most aggressive in terms of trying to take opportunity with this. In fact, they had their own online betting system going on for years. So I just like to say take it down a notch. I do notice that there's been some better responsible gaming commercials that have come out recently. We have some wonderful resources in the province of Ontario because we already have some infrastructure to do with casinos and already lotteries and so forth. So I'd like to see us concentrate on making sure those things are in proper place. And then after that, we can then consider that. I think doing the research point is critical. I mean, that's where we'll be best informed. So I just like to take it down a notch.
Yeah, can't argue against research, but Paul, what does your gut tell you about whether or not this country ought to ban using pro athletes in gambling commercials?
Well, I think what we've seen is that around the athletes, there's lots of rules leagues have put around it in terms of what they do. It's a name and likeness association and not encouraging betting. And there's a lot of rules around what the players can and can't do within those relationships they have with the companies. I agree. I think it's time to look and see how and the research is an important part of that in learning. Because one jurisdiction did it, the UK, a very different environment when it comes to betting. It's the biggest part of their gaming industry, where in Ontario particularly, the lottery is still the biggest product that's out there. So I think we all can learn and understand. And listen, from my conversations with broadcasters and leagues, they're interested to know too. They take this responsibility seriously. They know they're party to the betting industry now as part of their relationships. And everybody's trying to say, okay, how can we can look to be better? What can we do in terms of policies that they've put in place? Do they need to improve them? Broadcasters and how their content is viewed on television. Everybody's looking at all of these things as we learn. We've 9 months, 10 months in, we've got some time under our belt, and we're looking at what that is. And that's why it's an ongoing conversation, to be frank.
Yeah, sure, which is why we're having it
Yeah.
here tonight on TVO. Chelsea, I wonder if you could tell me whether, in your personal experience, you find that since legalized gaming came to all the professional sports leagues, and we're seeing it, during the course of games and on commercials and so on, at the risk of putting this in not a great way, is your business up since all this happened?
So the thing is, Steve, I can't speak to specific figures, but I will say that in terms of a year ago, my caseload has grown. So let's put it that way. Many of our gamblers switched to online gambling during the pandemic. And sports gambling has always been on the forefront of what we see a lot. And of course, yes, in the past it was done on those maybe in a more illegal sense or personal betting and things of that sort. But my caseload has grown.
Deirdre, how about you?
Yes, I agree with Chelsea. The landscape has changed, that's for sure. And so, people are calling more for this particular problem than they did before. And it's also concerning because when you think about vulnerable populations like youth, marginalized groups, the kind of betting you can do now can be more damaging than maybe what was happening before, because you could bet on multiple little things. Like you were saying in your introduction, you could bet on the color of the Gatorade or whatever. Like there's so many things, micro bets all the way through a game. That's different than before. So people can get into trouble more quickly. And this is what I'm hearing, again, anecdotally, waiting for that research to come out to confirm.
Well, anecdotal, but what other explanation would there be if the caseload has got up in the past year and things changed dramatically a year ago?
Good question.
Do you think you have the answer?
That's my guess, right? That the landscape has changed, but the other thing that's happened is that the pandemic is a factor, right? So when the pandemic hit, I think some people just didn't think services were there, and we continued to operate virtually the whole time, but not everybody knew that, right? So people are coming out again after the pandemic, emerging with different kinds of problems, but. Like Chelsea said, it's so important that people know that help is there and it's free. Connects Ontario is the place to call. If you think you have a problem, really important that you get help so it doesn't get worse, right?
Let me read this from James Tanner. He is a guy who writes for the hockey fan site Editor-in-Leaf, and he writes the following. For the NHL, whose main audience is the children that idolize the players and romanticize the game, this is a completely disgusting, unnecessary, and inappropriate source of income, considering most of their audience is made up of children. Yes, adults like hockey, but if you don't think that the NHL is for kids, you don't spend a lot of time with kids. Brian Massey, let me get you on this one. Are we doing an adequate job of keeping this stuff away from kids?
Well, I don't think so. I think, again, that part of the weaknesses that we had and what we're trying to address, I think, right now is that we devolved this decision because it was federal law to the provinces, and each province decides its own fate and its own structures in place and so forth. And I think that a good example of where we need to make sure there's normalization is that it's okay to go get help for sports gaming addiction. I think that's one of the changes that we're seeing now. Before it was sheltered and it was done on your phone in your basement, your backyard with your bookie. From all kinds of organized crime aspect. We had sensational cases in Toronto where they were using helicopters, guns, all kinds of different things were going on. And now we normalize it. And at the same time, though, there's got to be some responsibility for not just the performers, but also the governments to educate and make sure people feel comfortable. And it's okay to get help. And if you're not at fault. It's the same thing. I've been working on a lot of anti-fraud stuff. It's the same thing, is that we don't want people to feel shame from getting help. So to me, I think we just need to cool it a little bit right now and transition into the market a little bit more strategically, and also be able to address with some of this stuff. We have also alcohol that's already, advertised in front of kids. But again, it just, the NHL just looks like they're, again, just using this as an abusive attempt right now, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. It's very aggressive what they've done compared to the other leagues.
Okay, Paul, let me get your view on whether or not you think the industry is doing an adequate job keeping this out of the hands of kids.
Yeah, I think that you're seeing that because of the regulation that's been brought into place. So, prior to regulation in Ontario, you could sign into a site and put money in, and they didn't ask you who you were. They didn't ask for any identification. They didn't ask. So children could actually gamble if that was the case because there were no controls. That's ended. Two, we are seeing a lot of messaging around what can be advertised, how, because there's lots of rules being written from Think TV, who clears all the television ads that go on the air. They have a set of policies and standards. The Canadian Marketing Association is developing a further set of guidance. The gaming regulators have very clear rules and have forever about things that primarily appeal to minors, the images and likeness. Billboards can't be near facilities near schools or recreation centers that appeal to youth. There's lots of things written into the regulations to try and control these. The ability for operators not targeting minors in social media. All of those things, as best as we can through those processes, all are part of the regulatory regime we have now in Ontario. So yes, I think there is a start to do that things are better than they were. And I think as an industry, we know that people have control issues with our products. We understand that. And it's go to great efforts to make sure that we can provide tools, information. Those Connect 1-800 appear in every ad now that goes on television. That wasn't the case 6 months ago. Now that it's people know.
Did you do that, or were you forced to do that?
No, that's part of the regulatory regime that Ontario did in bringing out the framework. Operators are happy to do it.
Okay.
In terms of also providing access, and they train their staff
Let me
to be
bring
able to deal with people who have control issues.
Yeah, let me bring a new angle into this discussion here. And Chelsea and Deirdre, I'm going to start with you first. Chelsea, have you ever done this? Have you ever gambled on a sporting event, either with one of these new services or using your smartphone or whatever?
Personally, no.
Deirdre, how about you?
Sorry, no.
Haven't done it.
Mhm.
Okay. Brian, have you done it?
Yes, I used the Ontario Lottery Gaming thing, and I put a small bet on the Super Bowl, win-loss, and I won, thank goodness, but $20.
$20. You bet the Chiefs, and did you have to give any points?
I just bet the Chiefs outright. I'm an NFL player, fan, but yeah, I mean, that's the thing that we're looking for is casual involvement and enjoyment like that. But that's why, again, I just think that that's a better situation than me going to one of the other private operators. I quite frankly didn't have a choice in it, but I wish the Ontario Lottery Gaming Commission and the casinos were the ones that were primary operators to start with right now. But that's up to the provinces. And so they have several different groups that are out there right now. But I'm sticking with the public provider because I know that also the investment goes back to our healthcare and other types of initiatives.
Okay. Was it fun?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It wasn't, I mean, it's, I stayed home and had a friend come over to watch the Super Bowl. So for me, it was just part of the experience. But you can get into all these other things that you can bet on, but those have been out there for a long time. Like, the Gatorade. I mean, I think in Europe, they actually bet on even political races and a whole series of different things that we would see as outside of our normal system here. So to me, it's part of the experience. But again, it's part of my entertainment. But again, this is the type of stuff that we have a change in. And I think that it's important right now that we do this properly.
Okay. Paul, do you bet?
Yes.
What do you bet on?
I bet on NFL football. I bet on NHL hockey.
How do you do it?
For many years, I always enjoyed going to Las Vegas because it's the only place you could bet in person.
Well, those days are
because
long gone.
the sports book environment is very good. A lot of fun place to watch games because it's exciting and there's a lot of people interested. But I bet through apps. Hockey, I usually bet over-unders or winners, who's going to win the game. So an over-under on total goals.
Did you have a bet on the Super Bowl?
I didn't bet on this one.
You didn't bet on the Super Bowl?
No. I'm a Bills fan. It was kind of disappointing. There was no real motivation for me in this one, so
Kind of nice
I sat it out.
Nice to see DeMar on the field before the game, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, that was nice. Okay, can you explain to people who, I mean, I have to be honest, I've never done this, never placed a bet on the phone, or I don't know, for whatever reason, I just don't do it. What's the appeal?
For people, it's they love sport. So
I love sports too, but I've never done it. So what am I missing?
The sense of competition in some ways, and sense of further engagement, enjoyment of fans who get into the statistics and the details, who really are passionate about their game, and seeing as a way to have some fun, more fun with the game, enjoy it with friends, and some people do it to it's. Thinking, hey, it's nice to win a few bucks to bet on a game. And a lot of people, it is casual. It is recreational for, they bet on their team. So they always just bet on their team because
It's a way of supporting your
it's a
team.
way to support the team. I don't want to, that's who I cheer for. That's what I'm going to, I have probably 10 bets on the Leafs winning the Stanley Cup this year from a lot of sports books that open because
Seriously?
I said, yes.
You want to talk about the advisability of those bets?
That's why, but I placed them because I'm a fan, and as the market opened, that was my choice.
And Brian, I wonder if part of the fun in placing the bet the ability to come on province-wide television after the game and say, "Look how smart I am."
Yeah, well, I would have bet more if I was smart, but I mean, to me, it's part of the experience. So I joined a fantasy league for the first time with my friends, and so what I like about it is, I like researching the game. I like to see, and I look for games that I can actually get the underdog and beat the odds, so to speak. So I do research on the players, on little, it's like entertainment, and it's fun to do that. And then I bet on it, like I count the money lost. So if I lose the money, that's okay. I'm not going to go worry about it. And if I win, that's great. And so that's my enjoyment experience as part of it. And it doesn't bother me if I lose because I don't go into the betting without knowing that, I could lose it. And again, I love the research part of it. It's just fun. I mean, you have these experts and people with all kinds of different things going on, and you can actually, have fun trying to beat the odds in the system just for fun.
Deirdre, we got about a minute left here. I mean, clearly, the toothpaste is out of the tube on this. We are not going to outlaw sports gambling in the province of Ontario anymore. But if there were, if there's one thing you'd like to see change, what would it be?
Oh, one thing I'd like to see change, maybe not in the way that you're suggesting, but is a reduction of stigma around gambling addiction. I would love it if people just acknowledge that this can happen to anyone. And that if it is happening to you, it's important to get that help. The services in Ontario are amazing for treatment, free, accessible, confidential. So to move the discussion away from the shameful secret of having a gambling addiction to, hey, it's a mental health issue, and it's important to get help as soon as you recognize that you have it.
And it's out there. The help is there to be had.
It is there.
Very good. Okay, I want to thank the four of you for coming into TVO tonight, sort of virtually and actually. Brian Massey, the New Democrat member for Windsor West. Chelsea Rodriguez, problem gambling counselor at Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare. She joined us from Windsor, Ontario. Paul Burns, President, CEO, Canadian Gaming Association. And Deirdre Querney, registered social worker with the City of Hamilton's Alcohol, Drug, and Gambling Services. Great to have all four of you on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.